Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome. My name is Deirdre Tomlinson, and I'm with the American Institutes for Research. We're a partner on this project, CS for All Teachers. And again, thanks for joining us tonight. We have a great panel of guests and speakers, but before I go ahead and introduce them, I'd like to just call your attention to your screen. If you haven't already, if you introduce yourself in the chat pod, that would be great. Looks like a lot of people are already saying hi and reconnecting and letting us know who they are, where they're calling from, what they're teaching, maybe what grade level they're teaching. So that is great to know. Thanks for doing that. Feel free to keep doing that. You can also submit any questions that you might have for our presenters that might be content related, or any questions that you might have for me that are of more of a technical nature with the meeting software itself. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have in the chat pod. Looks like people are pretty comfortable using that so far. Also, just as a reminder, if you could mute the device that you are calling in on. So we have the option tonight of joining over your computer speakers or using the phone number that you see on the screen to call in. Either way of joining is fine. If you do call in over the phone, please be sure to mute your computer speakers. You may have heard a few moments here and there of what sounds like an alien ship about to land. That's just a feedback loop that's being created by your phone picking up your computer speakers. So if you called in on your phone, please do mute your computer speakers. However you're listening, if you could please mute your device. That will help us avoid any background noise while our presenters are speaking. Unless, of course, you do have a question that you'd like to ask. You can feel free to ask that question verbally, or you could also type that again into the chat pod. So let me go ahead and introduce who we have with us tonight. Tonight's webinar is APCS Principles Reference Sheet, Tips for Teaching in the Classroom. And our main presenter will be Deepa Muralidhar. So welcome, Deepa. Thank you for joining us again. And Deepa is joined by Richard Kick, Dr. Tom Cortina, and Danny Klag. So we look forward to hearing from them. And Deepa, I will turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody. This is Deepa here. I hope you can hear me clearly. I apologize for a slightly muffled tone. I have had a really bad cold and been down for the entire long weekend, sadly. The weather here in Atlanta, Georgia was fabulous for me. I'm not new to any of these audience here as I look at this wonderful attendance of participants growing every second. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We are really excited. We put a lot of time and effort and thinking into making this presentation as useful as we can. And we hope you have a good conversation with the other participants as well as our guests today who are extremely highly qualified. Really quickly about me, I teach at Rossville High School, and we have a fairly semi-active Georgia CSCA chapter here that I co-founded with another colleague, high school teacher. I have a computer science degree, which is why, that's really, I kind of try to tell myself as like, I'm just a master of one trade and I don't know too many things, and I could hardly do any other thing other than computer science. Our first guest that I'd like to introduce is Richard Kick. Richard Kick is a high school teacher at Newbury Park in California, and he is a math, stat, and a computer science teacher. I have worked with Rich for a very, very long time. As a pilot instructor, we both started out together as CS Principles pilot teacher. If you would mute your phone or your computer, please. I have no way of finding out what number that is.
All right. Okay. I'll be okay. I mean, I've got my eye on it, but thank you.
Wow. All right. So,
right. Right.
You want to? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay,
Zoom
good.
phone number is
All right, I'll be careful.
5224.
Thank you.
If you would please
Bye-bye.
mute your device. I do want to take a minute and re-emphasize. Phone number from 5224. If you would please mute your device. We were able to all hear the conversation that you had with somebody else. If you would prevent that from happening again, we'd greatly appreciate it. So I was talking about Rich Kick. Rich is also currently the APCS Principal Development Committee co-chair, and is a veteran high school teacher and has been teaching for many, many years, 37 as you can see. I have presented several webinars and face-to-face presentations with Rich, and it's an honor to have Rich here today among us to speak to us about the reference sheet. In my mind, there are very, very few people, very few high school teachers who have really taken the time to try and understand what does it take to teach a teenager programming. And it's not an easy ask. You cannot make it too difficult, but you cannot make it too easy. How do you chunk it? How do you scaffold it? And Rich is one of the people who I respect the most, who I feel has really figured this out. So I'll pass over the mic to Rich. Sir, it's yours.
Deepa, thank you very much for the introduction. I am very honored to be with this group today and all the people joining us in this discussion. As Deepa said, I have been a part of the development committee, and long before that, even going back to the initial exploration committees to determine whether or not we could actually create this course and how we could actually bring more people into computer science, especially underrepresented groups into computer science. So I was able to work with many, many people over the years and talked about what computer science is and how we could really inspire more people to come into computer science. And it's a very pleasurable occurrence now to really get to this first year and have the opportunity to have students experience this course and take the first exam this year. And so my students, as Deepa pointed out, at Newbury Park High School in Newbury Park, California, are actually preparing to take this first exam. I was lucky enough after 5 years of pilots to have 3 sections of AP Computer Science Principles this year. So we are looking very much forward to finishing our performance tasks and taking our first exam. So thank you again, Deepa, and look forward to talking with you all.
Great, thank you, Rich. Next, I'd like to introduce Tom Cortina. Tom is a teaching professor at the Carnegie Mellon University School of Computer Science. I have worked with Tom as a professor for teaching teachers computer science for a while now. I was honored to be part of his early CS4HS workshops. He launched the CS4HS, and something that Tom does not advertise a lot, he coined the word CS4HS, which now is under the Google umbrella of programs that Google offers. I think it used to also still at that point be something that Google funded, but Tom came up with the terminology. It's an honor and a pleasure to have Tom here with us. He has been involved with the CS Principles Project from the early on as well. And it's a great teacher. He's a lot of fun to listen to, and I think you will learn a lot from him. An exciting piece is he also is going to be the question leader for the first reading that Rich and my students are preparing for and are going to turn in their performance tasks. Tom is going to help us decide how the scoring has to happen fairly and accurately, and keeping in mind what's best for the students, the subject, and the whole academic unit as such. Tom, it's your turn, sir.
Well, thank you for that great introduction. Today I'm sporting my frog voice because I also have a cold. And I do want to point out that Deepa gave me this cold last time I Skyped with her. So I'm going to do my best to get through this. So I'm honored to be a part of this webinar as well, and I do see some friends online too. I'm glad to see you connecting in. I wanted to just kind of say sort of how I'm connected in that, I'm not teaching CS Principles, of course, in the high schools, but at Carnegie Mellon, I often teach a version of this course which we call Principles of Computing at Carnegie Mellon. It's called 15-110. And if you do Google me, you'll see a teaching page, or I actually have a link to the latest course I taught there. And you'll see that there's elements there that are similar to what's in the Principles course that the College Board designed. Early on, I was a member of the advisory board that started putting the course together and reviewing what the designers are putting in terms of the learning objectives. And I'm really proud that this course exists, because years ago, I, along with others, were asking the question, why do students, when they go into computer science, have to learn a deep course in programming first as their introduction? Whereas like in other areas like physics or chemistry, they get a much broader view of the world before they dive into any specifics in that discipline. And thankfully, other people were asking that too, and we all kind of got together, and now you have CS Principles, which is available. The course that we have at CMU is taught to non-technical non-majors, and it actually turns on a lot of students who are really scared about computing, especially in underrepresented groups where they really feel like they don't belong. So I'm very happy to be part of this program, and Deepa, you already mentioned I'm going to be part of the reading this June, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what the students are going to produce for us. Okay, Deepa, that's it.
Thank you, Tom. And I'd like to then introduce Danny Klag. Danny is really unusual, and we are very, very fortunate to have Danny as our guest speaker, and he agreed to come and speak today. Danny is an assessment developer at ETS. I cannot emphasize enough how unusual it is to have someone from that team agree to come and speak and work out their time so that they can come and share their knowledge. Danny's insight into APCSA, APCS principles exams is very deep and very unique. He not only has a content knowledge, but he actually develops these exams and works with a variety of content experts from various subjects, from various levels of education to produce these exams and then analyzes them. For the last 4 years, I've been very fortunate to work with Danny closely as part of the development committee member, and I have been stunned at Danny's brilliance. Danny is a very, very intelligent person, so if you ever encounter Danny, guys, I recommend that you play it very safe. Don't try to con him, because he will find out about you in a heartbeat. He's very, very smart, and he produces these amazing questions and very patiently puts up with people as they critique it and improvise it, and always aims to give the best for our students and for the final exams that come out signed by the development committees. And Danny's also been a teacher. That's where his compassionate nature comes from, which is very evident when you speak to him. Danny, the floor is yours, sir.
Hi, Deepa. I'm blushing. Thanks so much. I work on a variety of tests at ETS. I've had an opportunity to work on things like the SAT and the NAEP and the GRE exam. But a lot of my time now is now working on the AP Computer Science exam, and primarily the multiple choice portion of the AP Computer Science exam. So we don't want the exam to be a surprise to students. So I thought this was a great opportunity to try to communicate to teachers, what it is that their kids should expect to see on test day.
Great, Danny. Thank you. All right. So we're going to start our first set of questions. I'm going to project a question on there, and one of our panel members will step on to answer. Meanwhile, I invite you to post your questions, post your responses on the chat window, and I will try to pick them up, or one of our guests will try to pick it up, as well as we will encourage you to just speak into the phone once you've put it there, so that you can ask your questions to the guests. Please do know we want this to be as interactive as possible. Your questions, your answer, the fact that you have come today and we hope to be able to answer your questions are a priority for us. So we will definitely be looking out to being able to make sure that everything that you have out there are answered. Keeping that in mind, our first question is, the thinking here is, what was our intent behind creating the reference sheet? Tom, would you like to talk about it, about what was the intent behind it? Let's start with that.
Sure can. So one of the big principles behind CS Principles was that we wanted teachers to be able to use whatever language or tool they felt was most effective for their students. Of course, that gave us a big giant challenge for the exam itself, because how do we actually give questions that might indicate an algorithm or something like that, and what language you use and so on. So it was decided through the development committee and then the advising committee, I was on that, reviewed this, and we decided that there should be sort of a generic version of a programming language and a block type tool where students should be able to see questions, but in that more generic form. So whatever language they use, whatever block-based tool they use, they would recognize what they were looking at is very similar to what they did, during the school year. So that led to sort of that, there was sort of the reference sheet and the generic language and block symbols that are on the sheet. And it's also there, the intent is also there so that, and this is going to be addressed in future questions, but we're hoping, of course, that the students, when they get to the exam itself, they'll be familiar with what they would see on that reference sheet in terms of how questions might be phrased, so that the reference sheet is there really just as a backup. Really, I mean, we don't expect students to really use the reference sheet a lot, other than in case there's a bit of a panic and they really do blank out for a second. They have something there to kind of lean on.
Rich, as a development committee member and a class teacher, yeah, would you like to add on, sir? Hello?
I had my microphone muted.
Rich, are you there?
Yeah, I had my microphone muted. Can you hear it?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so as was mentioned, I've been teaching the computer science principles pilot for quite a while, and this is the first year of the official course. And I have been using the reference sheet after the course was taught, meaning I teach the concepts using the language of my choice, and my choice has been JavaScript. And I think originally when our group got together and envisioned this course, they knew that students would be most motivated by using languages that they are familiar with, that they understand, and teachers, honestly, are most motivated in terms of presenting and discussing the materials using languages that they are comfortable with, that they enjoy. So with that in mind, we tried to create a course that would allow that flexibility and have all teachers and all students use what was appropriate for them. Now we have the issue of testing and trying to determine how we can ask students using this variety of languages whether they understand programming. And so as a committee, it was discussed how we could create a common language that would be fair to all users. And this common language was a summary that was presented in this reference sheet. So from my perspective, it was something created to test what was already done, not something that is needed to actually teach the concepts. So we use that reference sheet to ask questions that should be familiar to students because they've used similar concepts in their own languages. So I'm going to probably at multiple times throughout these conversations discuss my personal perspective of teaching what you need to teach in the language of your choice, and then using the reference to ask these questions that students will become familiar with on the exam, but really shouldn't be that unfamiliar to them if they have been using their own language.
Great. Jenny, did you want to add something at all as we move on to the next question?
I'll just add that, we wanted to, I think Rich kind of touched on this, but we kind of wanted the list of instructions in the reference sheet.
Listen to this and tell me what you think. What's that mean?
We wanted the list of instructions to be familiar enough to students so that if you were learning a variety of different languages, like what you would see on the reference sheet wouldn't be that unfamiliar to you.
Great. I was just going to see if there were any other questions in the chat window. We are going to try and address one question that came up by Carol is how much practice should we give? And that's going to be a major part of conversation. We hope to answer many questions regarding that idea. Sorry, there's a lag here. Okay, so when should the teachers introduce a reference sheet to students? Rich, would you like to pick that one? When should they be introduced to the classroom? How should we introduce it to the students?
Sure. So I hinted when I discussed the idea that this was this common language through which we could ask questions that would be fair to all students no matter what language they used. My philosophy, because of being a part of that process, was that it should not be a sheet that I have to teach students up front. It shouldn't be a concept or content that they should learn. It's simply something they should be familiar with so that it doesn't look that dissimilar to what they've been using to learn computer science throughout their course. But it should be something that after I teach the concepts, students would then review that sheet, make sure they're familiar with all the content, make sure that they familiarize themselves with any differences between this reference sheet language and the language they've been using in class, and then make sure that they could use that to adequately answer the questions on the exam. So my philosophy has been to teach my course, to allow my students to explore the concepts in the languages that they are using. And then after that, I familiarize themselves with specific content on the sheet that will allow them to confidently answer those questions without having to spend a lot of time of teaching them the reference sheet specifically. So for my answer, it would be relatively late in the class, maybe a couple months before they actually took the exam, so that they get familiar with the types of questions they would see on the actual exam.
Great. There is a question that Denny, would you want to go ahead and read that question that Aaron has asked? I think about the mathematical piece. If you would just like to read the question and give your response so that everybody can read that, please.
Sure. So Aaron is asking, in the reference sheet on the second page, or I guess the first page after the intro page, under arithmetic operators, it indicates that, for example, 3/2 evaluates to 1.5. So that is, as Aaron pointed out, unlike how many programming languages work. And so he asked, will students be expected to differentiate between integer and floating point math operations? And so the decision was made to have 3/2 evaluate to 1.5, to just have it be as intuitive as possible for students coming in without any computer science background, so that the result of your division is the actual result. So we're trying not to ask questions that really hinge on this. So if we're using division in a question and it's involved in the answer to the question, we wouldn't have a distractor, another one of the answer options, be the result if you use integer division instead of floating point division. Like, we're not trying to be tricky about that.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, Tim. Tom, would you be able to, as a professor who trains teachers, can you tell them what you would recommend? What would you recommend to teachers as to when they should introduce a reference sheet?
Sure. So, I agree with everything Rich is saying as well that he said before about how he's using it and the intent. Something that we've discussed earlier on together as a group before we've met with everyone here in the webinar is that as you're doing some of the examples in your classes right now, and you're doing them in your particular language or block tool, a block-based tool, You might show them the more generic version of it using the reference sheet without showing them the reference sheet. They say, here's a particular algorithm, a little function that computes something, and let's just show it to you in another way, which is a little more generic, and just make sure they understand that it's saying the same thing. And even offer some short homework problems that might, like in some sense, start to just feed it to them little by little here and there and see that they're comfortable with seeing both the so-called real language or block-based tool and the reference sheet form as saying the same thing. When they get to the point when they actually have to prepare for the exam, then you can actually provide the reference sheet, and when the students get that reference sheet, the goal here is not for them to go, oh my gosh, there's all this new stuff, how are we supposed to know this? They should look at it and say, oh, we know this already. Because they've seen little bits and pieces that have gone along, and they felt comfortable going back and forth between the two.
Very nice. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Tom. Those are very helpful. Go on, sorry.
There's something else that I think we're going to address later. I'll tell you, it's about like writing exam questions, during their class. Are we going to cover that in a little while?
Go ahead and answer it so that we don't forget it. And then if we redo it again, that's okay. So if you'd like to go ahead. Okay.
So one of the strategies you might use is when you're giving them a quiz or a test, you might introduce, or even like a homework assignment, you might introduce a problem where they have to analyze a function to see what it's doing, and instead of giving it to them in their real, so-called real language or block-based tool, you give it to them using the constructs you would see on the reference sheet. Getting them used to looking at questions that way. And in fact, Dan, you could probably chime in on this. On the actual exam itself, students are not going to be reading real code in a real language or a real block-based system. They're going to be seeing code in this generic form. And the only place where they're actually going to be writing code in their own language they learn throughout the their high school course is when they do the larger tasks, explore or create.
Oh, that was excellent. Jenny, I'm just going to hold off on passing the mic to you to respond to what Tom was saying. There is a question that I thought maybe one of you can answer that Aaron asks. Is there any source for more practice multiple choice questions? Any thoughts, ideas, Rich, Tom, Jenny?
So there's a handful of questions in the course description, but I think probably a better place to look is the practice exam. So, Rich, how does a teacher access the secure practice exam from the College Board site?
So if a teacher wanted an actual full practice exam, they can go to the course audit site, and when they log in, they have course references for every course that they teach. So if you're teaching advanced placement computer science, you will have a link to that particular course, and you will have a link called Secure Documents. And if you click on Secure Documents, it will prompt you with a notice saying that this is a document that's expected to stay secure. You are agreeing that you will not disseminate this in electronic form. You will simply use it for classroom purposes in paper form. And then you can download that document and you will have the PDF that gives you the full 74 questions on a practice exam. And I have used that in my midterm as a first half exam just to test to see if students would be familiar with that material. So the material we covered, I used questions from that exam on a paper exam at the midterm, and the students, again, when I refer to the reference sheet, felt very comfortable seeing questions in the reference sheet syntax, even though I hadn't taught them the reference sheet at all.
Great. Pauline, hi Pauline, has put on the, there is a study book that's come out apparently, Fast Track to a 5, Preparing for an AP Computer Science Principles Exam. I haven't used it, but I have seen the book and recommended it to a couple of people, and I'm looking to see if someone has some opinion on it, but apparently that's a book out there as well. Okay. Pauline says there are 2 full practice exams in there. All right. So how can the reference sheet be effectively used to support APCSP students during their preparations for the exam? I think Tom touched on this briefly right now about giving short problems, and I think there are plenty questions that have been leading to that. Danny, did you want to go ahead and jump into Tom's conversation earlier that answers this question on how to effectively support, and then we can ask Rich to finish it up for how he does it in his classroom.
Sure. So I guess kind of building on what Tom was saying, I think the reference sheet can really be used at any point in your instruction. And I guess what I would like to point out is that with the instructions on the reference sheet, it's not intended that we want or expect students to write code using this language. Really what we want students to be able to do with it is to be able to, it's designed for multiple choice purposes, right? So really what we need students to get out of it is the ability to look at a program that was represented in this language and be able to interpret it and understand what it does, not to generate code themselves in this kind of miniature language.
Great. I'm going to ask a question that I think, Rich, if you would answer to this one, please. Evelyn Zayas says, right, I think Rich is just picking that up. She says that I'm surprised how much reading there is in the questions. Would you like to pick that up, Rich, and ask your question back again? Or I think she's referring to the exam questions as to how much of reading there is. Go on.
The question I read in the chat window was, I was surprised, or let's see, I lost it now.
So
I lost Evelyn's
she
question.
said, I'm surprised at how much reading there is in these questions.
And my question to Evelyn was, is she referring to the practice exam, or is she referring to the prep book? And Evelyn is now typing saying that she is referring to the Cengage book. So I can't discuss how much wording is occurring in the practice exams written by people that are not in the development committee. I can just tell you that the practice exam that is in the secured document section of the course audit for the College Board is, I think, very representative of the style of questions, the length of questions, the coverage of topics. And so if you're using a book, I think, created by people who are probably speculating on what the questions will look like, it's probably going to vary quite a bit. And if you go to that practice exam that was created by the committee and distributed by the College Board, you're going to probably get a good feeling for the type of questions, the breadth of questions, the style, and in particular, Evelyn, the amount of reading that would be required per question.
Great. While we have you on the mic, Rich, if you can also go ahead and put in your 2 cents on how can we use the reference sheet to support the students to prep for the exam.
So I really liked Tom and Danny's comments earlier. It was mentioned that even if you don't use the reference sheet, I think Tom said, just put a question in the syntax that will be found on the reference sheet. For example, in my course, I gave them questions where the variables were assigned values not with an equal operator, but with the arrow. And the students hadn't seen the arrow, and I simply said, I'm going to use arrow to indicate that this variable is being assigned a value. In general, I think a lot of languages use a double equal sign for comparison, and I simply made a statement that I'm going to use a single equal sign to allow for comparison in a Boolean expression. And a few of the things like that, I haven't gotten to lists yet, and we're going to probably talk about lists a little later, but I didn't have to mention that kind of level of detail. But just with those couple of statements of difference between their language and this reference sheet syntax, I then gave students exam questions, and I got no questions on what did this really mean or why is there an arrow here. They seemed to do fine, and they answered all the questions based on their knowledge of computer science and not really needing a prep on what the syntax was on the exam reference sheet.
Great. That was very, very helpful for me as well. Rich, can we just keep you on the mic for a little longer, please? What are your thoughts? Is the reference sheet a programming language? Does the reference sheet represent a specific programming language? Could you put in your 2 cents there, please? And then we'll pass the mic around.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that
Did we lose Rich? Rich, we can't hear you. Okay.
Deepa, this
Jen?
is Tom. I'll jump in while we find out where Rich went.
Okay.
The reference sheet is not a programming language. That's not what the intent was. You may even find a tool online where students can actually program with the reference sheet as if it were a programming language. And, you know, the development team and the folks sort of building this principles test really did not intend it to be a programming language. They intended it to be a way to express a function in a general way that all students who are taking the test would understand. So there's not really a need to sort of teach this separately as its own programming language. One other quick comment, and then I'll pull out here, is that one of the principles of computer science at a very high level, like at the college level where I teach, is that students need to move from one language to another or one style to another very quickly and sort of understand. So they will know one programming language, they have to learn another one. They can see things that are similar. So in some sense, students, when they're using this generic form on the exam, they're already sort of demonstrating that skill. That someone's expressing something in slightly a different form, but they should still be able to follow it because it's going to match very closely to something that they've actually programmed with.
Great. Danny, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So I kind of agree with what Tom said. You know, it's not intended to be a complete programming language. You know, there's things that in a real programming language that we would really want students to be concerned with that for purposes of multiple choice questions, we don't care about. So for example, like we aren't requiring that variables be defined by their data type. They just are. And it's things like that where we really want to kind of just like get into the kind of questions, you know, get right into the kind of algorithmic thinking without the overhead of some of the other things you need for a more complete language.
Charles asked this question, Danny, if you would take that. Why did they make the first element of the list at index 1?
So yeah, there was actually a lot of discussion among the development committee around this. Should we index starting with 0? Should we index starting at 1? And it was decided to go with 1-based indexing because the thinking was that for students who are coming in without any computer science background, that counting starting at 1 would be more intuitive. And there are some, I believe, block-based languages that do use 1-based indexing. So this is one of the things that one of the later questions we were going to ask is about, you know, what are kind of specific things that we need to pay attention to? And this is kind of one of those things. If you are used to starting at 0, it may be you'll have to adjust to starting at 1 and vice versa. If you're used to starting at 1 and you transition to a different language, you'd have to get used to starting with 0. I'll point out the same thing I pointed out about division is that even though we are starting at index 1, we try not to ask questions where that off by 1 error would cause you to get the question wrong. So if you thought the loop started at 0, you wouldn't see an answer option that kind of tries to pull those kids in that direction.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you. Tom, if
I just want to say, I apologize. I got frozen, so I'm not really certain what was not. Now I'm dialing in from the telephone, so hopefully this will work. Sorry about the interruption.
Oh, no worries. So you're back. Did you want to finish the sentence that you talked about with the reference sheet piece?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know what you heard. I finished my entire statement, but I have no idea what was cut off.
Okay. All right. So I will lead you back to where it is in a minute shortly. Help me understand. Can you see the chat window?
I do not. It froze on me.
Okay, great. I just needed to know so that I knew what to ask. Thank you. Tom, if you would like to answer the question that you just picked up on the from Cynthia, go right ahead, please. If you would read the question and then answer it, that would be great.
Sure. I'm going to look for it here. It is, you want to know if students could use the reference sheet for pseudocode during the create task, if that would be a good idea. And I thought about that a little bit, and I think that would be a good idea. In terms of planning what they need to program, it might help to, it kind of takes me back to my flowcharting days years ago. It would give them a chance to sort of think about what they want to put together without worrying about the details of the language. Yeah, I think so. Of course, in the end, what they have to submit for the create task is their code, is the actual real language or the real block-based tool, their actual final product. But they could use the reference sheet the pseudo instructions that are there for planning, certainly.
Great. So the other question that's right there is, it is my understanding that the reference sheet language has no compiler or interpreter, so it would not be possible to demonstrate the program running at all. Rich, would you like to pick that one and answer to it, and then Tom, could you follow up on what are your thoughts on that, given that there is, it's right, you're right, Eric, there is no compiler or interpreter, so a student writing in the reference language cannot demonstrate the program running, but is that necessary? How important is that, Rich?
Yeah, that's a good point, Deepa. Is it okay? Can you hear now?
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay. We had, again, looked at this reference sheet as a vehicle through which we could test. It was never intended through discussion or creation to be a vehicle through which you would actually program. But again, I respect colleagues who have made vehicles through which, using their language, they can actually write in the reference sheet language and they can test programs. So they can actually put in questions from, say, the sample exam, and they will actually be able to execute that. Dan Garcia from the Beauty Joy of Computing at University of California, Berkeley, has something he wrote in Scratch that will allow you to actually run through problems in the reference sheet language if you're familiar with the Scratch environment and you are comfortable with the tool he has created. And he is, even in the future, suggested he may be able to put online or have discussions of how to use that tool. But again, I don't think it is a necessary tool. It's just another enhancement that our community always brings to it that gives us one more option, which I think we can thank Dan for giving us that. I believe there's been at least one other professor at a highly respected university who actually made an interpreter and allows you to put in the syntax from the reference sheet. But again, my personal preference would be I would not give them questions to test by running in anything other than the language that I'm teaching. And then if they want to do a problem and figure out whether that problem actually executes correctly. They'd either hand trace it or we'd write it in the language of our personal choice. In this case, we use JavaScript.
Great. Oh, thank you for that answer, Rich. That is fantastic. Tom, would you like to chime in? Your response this morning was phenomenal.
Yeah, so the only thing I'll add quickly is that although the tool or tools may be out there and there may be future ones that pop up as well, I agree with what Rich said and what Danny was saying, is that there was never an intention that students would write code in this form, of what you see on the reference sheet. The intention was they would read some functions that were written in that particular form so that they could answer basic multiple choice questions about algorithmic thinking and computation. That was the only reason that existed, really. And I do believe, and Danny, maybe you can speak to this briefly, we're not expecting anyone to actually write code in the reference sheet form for the create task. We're expecting a real language or a real block-based system. That's what we're expecting.
Right. So one of the requirements for the create task is to show a video of your program running. And so in the absence of a compiler that will run the reference sheet language, you'll have to use the language.
Hello, Jenny?
Yep.
Okay.
I think you were cut off at the end, Danny.
Oh, sorry about that. So I guess I'm just saying for the create task, the reference sheet language is so limited that if you're really trying to showcase your end-of-year project, you'd really be better off to use a more powerful language for the create task.
Great. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Danny. Moving to the next question. The reference sheet has text and block-based code. Is there a preference for one format over the other? Should there be a focus on one teaching format over the other?
So I will...
yeah, go on, Rich. Thank you.
I will give my perspective on that. I know the committee, and I know Danny and ETS has worked very hard at equity in making sure that there is no advantage of a student who learned computer science and programming in a text-based language over a student that has learned in a block language or vice versa. These students, regardless of the language they have used, regardless of the paradigm that they're using, regardless whether it's text-based or block-based, they should have the same opportunity to be successful on these questions in the multiple choice and multiple select format as any other student. And so, again, my own personal experimentation, this is certainly not a study, but the experimentation I did with my students convinced me that there was no more concern over looking at a question in block-based than there would be in text-based. And they used text-based for the entire course this year. And as I said, you can extract from the block-based the text that allows them to understand what the question is really asking, what the code is intended to do, and it doesn't seem like you would be advantaged or disadvantaged no matter what type of language you would use. And Danny may even have some statistics on that or some educational testing service perspectives on that.
So yeah, I'll just add that items before they appear on an operational exam are usually piloted, so we can get some preliminary data on how they perform statistically. And what we've noticed in the pilots we've done so far is that it doesn't appear that there's a difference in difficulty between questions that are presented with code and text versus questions where the code is presented in blocks. So at least for the sampling of students that we piloted with, it seems like the kinds of things that we're asking students to do, the format of the way the code is presented isn't presenting an obstacle.
Great. Yes. Tom, do you have any closing thoughts on these before I move to the next question?
No, I'll reiterate that when the development committee was putting the course together, that was one of the explicit goals we had. I was on the development committee, I was on the advisory committee, but we wanted to make sure that there was no bias from one side to the other. So I know the College Board's been working very, very hard as the questions are being put together to make sure that they can avoid that as much as possible.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. So I think that would be one of a major concern. I see it in all the various teacher PDs I hold. That's a major worry. So this is very good and very useful to get this kind of feedback from some very, very key people who have been designing and are involved in this heavily. The next question. Danny, would you please, let's start with you, sir, and then we'll pass the mic around to Rich and Tom. While preparing for the exam, are there specific things in the reference sheet that you would like teachers and students to pay attention to?
So I think I think we've actually touched on a bunch of them. So I'll just try to summarize what's already been said. So Rich pointed out that when he introduces the reference sheet, he has to clarify to his students that, we're using the left arrow for assignment, and we're using a single equals instead of a double equals for comparison. Similarly, if your students are not used to using lists that are indexed starting at 1, using one-based indexing would be something that you'd want to have your students pay attention to. It was already raised the issue of the division operator not performing an integer division, so that would be something you'd want to point out to students. And the other thing that I'd point out that wasn't already mentioned is about the robot question, and specifically like what happens if a robot tries to move to a square that's blocked, or if the robot tries to move off the grid. So there's a statement at the top of the robot section that says, if the robot attempts to move to a square that is not open or is beyond the edge of the grid, the robot will stay in its current location and the program will terminate. So again, we try not to write questions where it will hinge on this kind of error condition, but we do want students to know that, this is what happens if a robot moves where it's not supposed to.
Thank you. Rich, would you like to go ahead and chime in on this? What would you pay focus to in your classroom with your students? And I'm sorry there's an echo. I have muted everything I can. But Rich, the floor is yours, sir. Sorry.
Thank you, Deepa. And as I previously said, making sure students see that arrow assignment operator, making sure students see that the single equals is comparison. Danny added to the perspective, but the one thing I just want to reemphasize is that the list operations and the list syntax is something that's probably different for students than what they have used in other languages. There's such a variety of ways to use lists in these different languages that it was difficult to find a commonality. So that's something that as we get deeper into the programming assignments, I want to spend some more time with in terms of preparing students. I'm going to make sure they're familiar with the types of given. I'm sorry?
No.
Are you able to hear?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay.
You just please go right ahead.
So I would specifically show them how you can use the square or the brackets to access and or to assign list values. I would specifically show them the insert procedure, the append procedure, the remove procedure, and the length, and make sure that they're familiar with those, because those are things that will be the building blocks of solutions that are written or code samples that are written on the exam, and that's something students definitely want to be familiar with before they have to take the final exam in May.
Excellent. Tom, would you like to close out on these thoughts?
We've hit most of the ones that I know that we've been concerned about, and we've been discussing this earlier. There might be a case where if random comes up, the two bounds in random on the reference sheet are inclusive. So if you say random, as it says on the example, random 1, 3, that includes 1 and 3 as part of the random numbers. There are some languages where the second number may not be inclusive. But I know when I've been talking with Danny, they don't write questions that will give you little gotchas there. If you miss that one thing, you're not going to get the question wrong. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's just something to point out.
Great. Any other questions from the audience as we start winding down? We have about 2 to 3 minutes left. You have been a great audience. There have been a lot of very good questions that have come out, and I would like to put the floor to the audience before I go back to my guests. Any thoughts, any questions that you'd like for us to answer? Some concerns, something that you've been searching for, something that's frustrating you, something that will help you better be prepared to train your students for the AP exam. Danny, you want to take that one? Can someone please lobby at ETS to allow us to read for both CSP and CSA?
Hang on.
I can take that back. I know there have been talks about it. So I'll take that back.
Another line, so I had to.
Okay. So he's going to go and ask ETS.
I'm just listening. But anyway, let me just log in and see what you're trying to do.
Okay. Any other closing thoughts? Should I just pass the mic around really quickly? Rich, any thoughts? Tom, any closing thoughts? And then I'll circle back to Rich again for the good of the group.
Not in particular, although the only thing I would say is I wish all these teachers very good luck, and thank you for being part of the first year. I mean, we couldn't do it without you.
Great. Danny, your closing thoughts for the good of the group?
Sure. I guess I would just encourage teachers to use the AP teacher community. So if you have a question that occurs to you in a couple days that you didn't think to ask now, ask it on the AP teacher community, and we have folks from the development committee who are checking that regularly.
There's a question from Carol that says any comments about lists. We did address about the fact that it starts at a 1 and that there are questions that would be on lists. I'm not sure that there is anything else that needs to be added unless anybody thinks so. Then please do chime in. But otherwise, I think we have addressed everything there, Carol. Unless you have anything very specific, please post that in the chat window. Rich, the mic's back to you, sir. Any closing comments for the good of the group?
Yeah, sorry about the mute confusion. I just wanted to thank everybody for helping to make this possible. I think it's very important, especially in this first year, that we have opportunities to discuss with the entire community everything we need to discuss to effectively prepare our students. And so thank you, Deepa, and thank you to Deidre and everyone who has helped to make this possible. Definitely thanks to Tom and Danny for giving their perspectives. And I hope we all continue to move forward and bring computer science to more and more of our students. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. That was outstanding. Well, Tom, Danny, Rich, I thank you for your time. I know that I demanded quite a bit out of your time as I met with you over the evenings. Thank you for being so responsive. Thank you for being available. Thank you for being so much fun to work with. It's honestly been one of my memorable webinars. It's been a true pleasure. I would like to extend my thanks to NSF and AIR to really serving the computer science education community in such a useful way where they give us these opportunities to hold a webinar, and they're so hands-off and giving us the ability to really serve the teachers to the best of our ability. And it's 8:30, so I'm going to pass the mic back to Deidre.
Thanks so much, Deepa. Again, thank you to our other speakers as well, Rich, Tom, and Danny. You guys did a fabulous job. I was keeping an eye on the chat pod. It's so nice to see questions coming in for our presenters, but also questions amongst each other, and folks answering those questions and helping each other out. And that really helps to foster such a nice community of practice. So if you're looking for more of a sense of that community of practice, please do check out our website. We'll put that up on the screen in just a moment, and that's where you can find blogs and these webinars. You can find the recordings there, other resources and materials that you might find helpful doing the work that you do. I would also like to just call your attention to some upcoming webinars that we have planned. So we do have another one tomorrow evening on impact and connections. And then also just please note, if you're planning on attending the March 1st webinar, Funding for CS Resources and Support, that has been moved to March 14th. So please update your calendars for that one. And we do also have another webinar on deck for April 26th. So please do join us for those, and you can visit the events tab on the website that you see the link on your screen now. So again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you also to everyone for joining us tonight. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.